In that bill, amongst other things, is direct sanctions against targeted individuals. And at the moment, it refers to certain officials and ANC officials. And if the United States reaches out to South Africa, we would be foolish not to also reach out towards that to the best benefit of South Africa. Talking about the government of national unity, I honestly believe it can be the perfect thing that can turn this country around.
So, ladies and gentlemen, here is the headlines from the newspaper currently, and this is as a result of a lot of traffic that has happened between South Africa and the USA over the last couple of months. Many delegations have gone to the US, and a hot topic has been BE laws, expropriation laws, many other laws, and the latest delegation to go to the US. Join us at our State of the Nation business breakfast at the Sandton Convention Center on the 16th of July. Our guest speakers include activist Rob Hersov and well-known media personality JJ Tabani, as well as me, your host, Mike Sham. So if you're interested in joining us at our State of the Nation business breakfast, see the details below. We look forward to having you there. Has been led by the man sitting here with us today, and that is the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, Dr. Corné Mulder. Corné, welcome back to the State of the Nation.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's good to be back in South Africa and to be home.
Yeah, and it's the first time we're speaking to you as leader of, we've communicated outside of this, but it's the first time to have you on the show. Congratulations
Thank you very much.
to your promotion as leader.
Thank you.
We'll get into the local politics in a minute, but let's talk about your trip to the US. It's hot news at the moment because it obviously just took place.
Yes.
You went together with Dr. Theo de Jager. Is he still with SAI? Is that what it's called?
Yes,
he's an agricultural union.
Yes.
And Gerard Papenfuss, who's with NIASA, the
National Employers Association
of
South Africa. Yes.
And you went there and you met quite a few high-powered people in the US and discussed the situation of South Africa with Americans.
Absolutely. What basically happened was, since the beginning of this year, there's been a focus on South Africa. President Trump, at the beginning of his second term, basically took out his magnifying glass and is focusing on South Africa, and he started in such a process. It started off with that executive order right in the beginning of the year. Then we saw the expulsion of the South African ambassador, and then some delegations went there. It was also the delegation of President Ramaphosa with some people that went there. Solidarity Movement went there. I was in an interview just prior to the delegation of the president going, and I said, I think it's premature because you don't start on the level of heads of state. The relationship is so broken down that you have to start on another level, at the official level, try to sort these things out, and then you get the heads of state at the end to sign an agreement. And I also said, I'm very thankful that I was not invited to go because I think it's going to be a catastrophe, diplomatic catastrophe. And I would rather go on my own at a later stage and put the case. And I also said, I think we need some people there to put also the Afrikaners' agenda on the table from our perspective. The people that went did their best, but so this delegation then went, and we were very well received in Washington. I'm very impressed.
So the good news for South Africa, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that South Africa is very strategic, geographically, in terms of some of the natural endowments that South Africa has, minerals, etc. And the bad news is that we're very strategic. We're very important in terms of our geography as well as some of the stuff that we have in the country. So it means that they can't just forget about South Africa like you could with Zambia or one of those other countries.
No, you can't, and they don't want to.
Yes.
They really don't want to. The message that we found right across where we went were, we would like to see South Africa prosper. We want to see South Africa become again a winning nation. And that was also our message. We didn't go there to complain. We wanted to say that these are the facts. Let's deal with these facts. And how can we turn things around to make the country again a winning nation? And what we also did was we said, we think there's a lack of leadership. There's a leadership vacuum in South Africa. And also understanding the Trump administration, we went there to say, we think a deal should be put on the table from South Africa's perspective. And if we had the choice, this is what we propose in terms of a deal. And that was quite well received. That's what the United States and Americans understood. And in our discussions there, we had really high-level discussions across the board. And one needs to understand that you've got the executive there in the White House, then you've got on the Hill, Capitol Hill, you've got at Congress, the Senate and the House of Reps, as well as the State Department. And in all these institutions across the board have specific segments or parts of those institutions that deal with Africa and South Africa. And we were privileged to meet with people in all those departments that specifically deal with South Africa, and it was quite interesting to how things went.
Now, the White House has kind of made 4 pillars of their, 4 requests of South Africa in order to get American support.
Sure.
And which would mean lower tariffs, which would mean increased trade, which would mean they would help us along to prosperity.
Yes, absolutely. It was very fascinating, that discussion, because we were putting our case and we were saying the things that we see, how we experience it, what we think, what we want, what we need to get the country back on track. And they listened. And then at the end of the discussion, they said, okay, fine, we've listened to you. Now we want you to listen to us. And they basically pre-prepared, came out and said, these are the 4 preconditions that the Trump administration is setting in order to normalize relations between the United States and South Africa. And they spelled them out one by one. And let me quickly remind you of them. The first one was to say they feel very strongly about rural security in terms of farm murders, black and white, laborers, black and white, and they want that to be proclaimed as a priority crime when those kind of things happen, and they would like to see that investigated by specialized units like the Hawks. That was the first point. The second point they made was to say this slogan, this kill the boer, kill the farmer thing, they want the ANC to publicly denounce this. And I asked specifically, I said, do I understand you correctly? Are you talking about the government of national unity? Who should denounce this in public? And they said, no. We want the ANC to denounce this. This came from them. This is their slogan. They must give the lead and denounce this publicly. And then they went to the economy. The third precondition that they set was to say there's no way that they can accept expropriation of property without compensation. What needs to be there is fair market compensation. And then they went further to say, and that can only happen after all the judicial processes have been followed, and you end up with the end of a judicial process where compensation is allowed in terms of the legal process, but then there must be fair market compensation. And the fourth one, which I felt very strongly about, was black economic empowerment. And they said they want exemption from that for American firms and entities. They want to get involved, they want to up their investment, but those are their conditions. And the interesting thing is this, they said to us, please go home and convey this message. We seem to not be able to get that message across to the South African government. They do not listen to us. The embassy does not listen to us. Please go home and tell South Africa, these are our preconditions.
Now, more than just not listening to us, in many of these, the president's actually doubled down.
Yes.
He actually endorsed the singing of Kill the Boer.
Yeah.
Right? So he endorsed that, so that we can scratch that one off.
Yeah.
He gave you an economics lesson that we'll discuss in a minute around BEE, right? Yes. Expropriation Act is fairly new, so I'd imagine it's very unlikely that he's going to do anything about that. And safety and security, yes, they will say it's a priority crime, but nothing ever gets done about it.
Correct.
So, these 4 preconditions look very unlikely to be met.
Well, that's now the crisis that we are heading towards, because on the 9th of July is a deadline for tariffs to be imposed. And it's very difficult to estimate what's going on, because you remember after these events in the Oval Office, the delegation came back and said, no, it was a huge success. And afterwards, some of the reports said relations have been reset, and President Ramaphosa will meet President Trump at the G7 in Canada, which then didn't happen because of the events internationally with Iran. I know that the last couple of days there were some meetings in Angola, some other trade meetings, and there may have been some discussions. But from the Trump administration side, no relations has been reset, and it seems there's no movement on tariffs as such until these preconditions are discussed. And as you correctly point out, in terms of the positioning of the ANC and President Ramaphosa, it seems unlikely that they are prepared to move. So it's almost a question of saying to South Africa, reform these things or face rejection. And that has got huge implications. And I don't want to see the wrong people suffer in South Africa because of intransigence of people who do not want to listen and make the necessary changes.
Yeah, because, we are going to see the collapse of exports to America and probably a massive disinvestment of American businesses that have been invested in South Africa for many generations.
Well, that's the crisis. And the problem is this. We also had the opportunity to meet with some business people in the States. And that was fascinating. Them saying to us, we have access to the American market. It's an almost unstoppable, huge market, consumers market. One gentleman asked Theo de Jager, what are you farming with? And he said, this, that, and the other. He said, everything you can produce, we'll buy. And if you look at what SAI, for example, they're not only active in South Africa, they're the Southern African Agricultural Initiative. They've got 4,500 farmers throughout Africa in 44 countries. So they said, please go ahead. Whatever you produce, we will take up in the American market. So there's a huge need and a reach out towards South Africa to import and for companies to come here and from the Americans' perspective to assist us with direct foreign investment in terms of in the deal that we put on the table. We said to them, let's start with our energy crisis. We've got a number of coal-fired power stations that are old and dilapidated. You've got technology. Let your companies come and let's refurbish them and start there. Then we can go to nuclear pebble bed kind of reactors and get the energy situation. That will lead to infrastructure in terms of roads, ports, etc., etc. And they were quite excited about that, which will make the way open for companies to come and invest and to create jobs. But as you correctly point out, it seems at this stage, and the point I made very clearly at the Hudson Institute, the biggest group of South Africans that are suffering because of these economic policies are black people. If you talk about 32% unemployment, the official rate, it's higher most likely, and the youth unemployment is even higher. They are the ones that are suffering because of a policy that clearly is not making a change in terms of economic growth and job creation.
Yeah, and to back that up further, by the government's own statistics, the unemployment remains low amongst the white population.
Yes.
So therefore, it's quite clearly not the white population. We could all be doing better.
Exactly.
But, we are gainfully employed in one form or another. So in other words, the people that have suffered the most out of these policies
are ordinary blacks.
Are ordinary black South Africans.
Yeah.
Like I said so many times, any economic growth feeds straight into the black population because they're the ones that need jobs and opportunities.
Yeah.
So, here we sit with a list of demands, which, depending on where you sit, seem to be so logical, but the government is absolutely doubling down on all of them.
Well, it'll be a huge mistake. I was asked to convey this message, and I'm doing so, and South Africa is taking note. I've also said I will try to interact with the president, and I will try to inform the president, please take note of what is being said. And then the president must take note and see how we deal with these things. And the problem, and we'll get to that, the problem is within the government of national unity, that both the issues that are relevant here, the economic policy and international relations, seems to be the exclusive domain of one party in the government of national unity. But I hope that we can really have an open-minded approach. The answer is on the table. This is what we need to do, and we can turn the economy around, we can create jobs, and we can go forward and put South Africa in the position that we used to be in terms of economic growth and strength. Let's do that.
Yeah. Now, some of these things that you mentioned, and I mentioned earlier that you were given economics lecture by our president.
Yes.
I think we've got a clip that we'd like to put on the screen at the minute, just to show that interaction that you had with our president.
Real new economic policy, as far as I'm concerned, needs to take a different approach with regard to certain basic things that I don't know if you're prepared to do that with regard to black economic empowerment, with regard to equity, employment equity.
Thank you, Honourable Mulder. Your time has expired.
Appropriation without compensation. Are you prepared to do that?
And I'm rather surprised and taken aback when I hear
What you just said now
that
is not different from what you've been
policies of black economic empowerment militate against the growth of our economy. And I can tell you, Dr. Mulder, there's nothing that gives our people joy, particularly black people, as they go around and they find that this production facility is owned by a black person. It warms one's heart. It makes us feel so good because we've come.
So quite clearly, President Ramaphosa remains absolutely resolute in his belief and understanding that the secret to economic growth isn't to build new companies, but to have black ownership of white companies.
I was really astonished by his reply. The question I asked for a specific reason. And if you look at the declaration of intent or the statement of intent of the Government of National Unity, the one thing that binds those very diverse parties together with very different ideological take on these things was the idea of getting the economy to grow and to create jobs. And the question I said, President, we are all focused on this and we all agree on this. What new economic policy have you from the government side been working on or are prepared to put on the table? And my approach was, if I look at the current basic economic policy in terms of economics and in terms of black economic empowerment, in terms of equity and the way it's interpreted, quite clearly to any observer, it didn't bring the necessary results. The growth rate around 1%, unemployment 32 plus. So there's a problem with the policy. What new policy is there? And I was amazed with regard to his answer. He came down, gave me a lesson in 101 economics, asking me all kinds of, with all due respect, Mr. President, irrelevant questions. Do I want black people to be poor? No. Do I want black people never to own their own businesses? No. But that was the kind of things that he was trying to put on the table. And then he had an argument and doubled down on black economic empowerment. That was unfortunate. Yeah. Quite clearly, he's committed to that, but quite clearly, this is not what is bringing the success. And then I'm very interested in that report from Professor William Gumede, which says that he was asked to look into black economic empowerment, and what he found, R1 trillion circulated amongst less than 100 people. Yeah. I used that in the United States, and I said, well, let's make the calculation. We're talking about $55 billion US. And they were very interested to know, but who are these people? What is this? That is not black economic empowerment. Definitely not.
Now, we've actually had Professor William Gumede on the show recently where he discussed that very report, showing that black economic empowerment is really just enrichment of a few politically connected individuals. Yeah. So let's imagine for a moment that the government doesn't, laughs off these sort of 4 pillars, preconditions of the US. Yeah. And it will have the necessary effect. You and I both lived through American disinvestment in the 1980s, where eventually brought the country to the negotiating table. Right? Yes. The dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about was that the reason that we were that talk started was because the economy had collapsed. And I do understand we live in a different world, and there's a multipolarity. Is not just one group of people in this world. But what do you think to literally say to the US to tell them to go to hell with these preconditions? What do you think is going to happen?
It will be a fatal mistake. It will be a complete underestimation of the determination in that administration at the moment. And people should just take note. We currently see an administration in the United States that does not shy away from using their muscle, be that economic or even military. So it will be a huge mistake to try and just downplay this. And that was my concern. It's a little bit of a naivety on South Africa's side to just think we can just quickly explain one of these things and say it's not that bad, don't worry, and then there will be normality. It's not going to happen. Yeah. So it will be the wrong message. And one must also remember, we also saw Representative Congressman Ronnie Jackson and his office and his staff He has introduced a bill into the Congress now that deals with a re-look at the relationship between the United States and South Africa. That bill was not going through. It was a previous bill in the last administration, but in this administration, Republicans have a majority in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, and the President. And those kind of things may come onto the table if South Africa just try to shirk away from what is being asked.
What is in that bill?
In that bill, amongst other things, is direct sanctions against targeted individuals. And at the moment, it refers to certain officials and ANC officials.
Based on what would that be?
Well, if you look at the bill, I can show you a copy just now. It's about 8 pages, paragraph after paragraph, naming incidents of where the United States believe that South Africa acted detrimental to the national security interest of the United States.
Because America has made it quite clear that their foreign relations vests on 3 pillars. Is it helping the interests of the US? Is it helping the economy? And there was one other sort of common sense action within their policy. And quite clearly, some of the things that South Africa has done has lined them up to get that kind of sanction.
Correct. There are specific 2 things that they feel very strongly about. The one is South Africa's too close relations and ties with Iran. And the second one is taking Israel to the Court of Justice, National Court of Justice. That whole thing, in the past, they've had a 5th thing that they didn't convey to us now, is that the relations with Israel should be normalized. They didn't say that to us now, and they thought that maybe it's not something to ask the Afrikaner delegation to convey. But international relations and the security of the US is to them very much paramount in terms of their way of going forward. The second part of the deal that we proposed, the first part dealt with trade. The second part was a more geopolitical kind of thing to say there should be an agreement between the United States, Argentina, and South Africa, because those 3 countries control the entrance ports to the South Atlantic, which is vital to the national security interests of the United States. Around the Cape of Good Hope, around the Cape of Horn, and through the Panama Canal. And that is a different kind of approach, because the United States is quite concerned. They are taking note of the fact that China is changing their navy from a coastal navy to a deep sea, deep water navy. They don't want to see China being in charge of Simonstown as a naval base. So if we go down that route, it will even deteriorate relationships further. It's not necessary.
What do you say to many people that will be watching this that would say, the US is yesterday's news, China's the future. So China come in here with, and they can produce everything, and they've got, 1.5 billion people or whatever it is, and they can come in and be South Africa's new best friend.
As Theo de Jager correctly pointed out in one of his arguments about agriculture, he said to the Americans and to the business people, he says, we as Afrikaners know that we don't understand Africa properly, but we do know we understand it way better than the Chinese could ever do or anybody else. And the United States realizes that also. That's why they see us as an ally in Africa who can play a constructive role. Anyone who thinks that the United States is done for is making a fatal mistake. There's a revival in the United States. There's a proud tradition. There's a proud heritage. The United States is back, and people must understand that. Economically, unbelievably how strong they are. Military, nobody comes close to that. And if you look at President Trump, he doesn't want to be in conflict with the rest of the world. He wants peace. That's his aim. We shouldn't think that we were going to be in a better position if we think that others will come to our rescue in the end. No. Each country will have to look for its own interest, its own best interest. And if the United States reaches out to South Africa, we would be foolish not to also reach out towards that to the best benefit of South Africa. That doesn't mean that we have to turn our backs to other countries in the world. Yes, I'm not talking about rogue states, but we can trade. We should be at least try to be neutral and trade and do whatever is necessary. Why? To get this economy growing, to create a beautiful, prosperous life for all South Africans.
Yeah, and one must also view this in the backdrop of the actions of some of our neighbors. We saw Angola go to the US, we saw the DRC go to the US, and we've even seen Zimbabwe go to the US to seek better relations, to seek trade deals.
And they all succeeded. They are getting the best trade deals at the moment. For example, the peace agreement which now reached between the DRC and Rwanda, part of that deal is also involved the whole question of critical minerals. The president of Zimbabwe at the moment is reaching out to the United States. He doesn't want to be in the same position as South Africa, and he's making all kinds of interesting proposals with regard to critical minerals, etc. Why do we want to be right at the end of the line and not see these opportunities to the best benefit of all? And that's why I've said, I think we need to get this message across to ordinary citizens, black, white, English, Afrikaans, it doesn't matter. To get the message across that things can be different and we should not become the victims of political elites that keep us captured.
Yeah, and you know what I say to people that think that this new world order that's going to get South Africa, put South Africa in a different place, if China loved doing business with South Africa so much, they would have opened businesses in South Africa, and there's been a conspicuous lack of Chinese businesses opening in South Africa. They like to sell products. Different to put stuff into a container back at home, send it over, that's one thing. But to actually open up a plant that builds cars here or does something like that. And
no, they're interested in the minerals and the resources, and they take them home.
Yeah, and if we think that the US has got a problem with BEE, then we should speak to the Chinese. They've got a bigger problem with BEE.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Corné, all of this brings us around to the fact that you are in this government.
Yes.
Your predecessor, Peter Groenewald, is a minister in this government. You sit around the same table as this president.
Yes.
And every bit of action, you mentioned that they keep control of certain key ministries, but that's in your name as well.
That's a problem. I think I've been a proponent of the government of national unity before it was formed, coming from the whole experience of coalitions. We need to do that. We bring together, that was the idea, the best that South Africa can offer. We form a government, a coalition, or a government of national unity. The problem originated because of the constitution that forced us to form a government within 14 days. And that didn't make it possible for a long negotiation process and to agree on a policy platform. At that stage, it was said in the documentation that we will have a national dialogue. And the understanding was the national dialogue will then deal with creating a policy platform and then to govern for 5 years. Now, it's a year later, we haven't had the national dialogue, and the one that is being proposed now doesn't seem to be the one that is the idea to form a national platform or a policy platform. At the moment, normally in South Africa, we will have 40, 50 laws being passed by Parliament in a parliamentary year. So far, we've had one, only one, and that's the budget. And I think part of that is because there's no agreed policy platform. So what's happening is each and every ministry is on its own process, doing what they think and doing what they want to do. But with regard to economic policy, and that's why I asked that question, we need some reform, we need some movement in that regard. But the president has made it very clear, as far as he is concerned, nothing needs to change. As a matter of fact, it needs to be enforced in a more stricter manner. And then the second one with regard to international relations. Now, it's not acceptable. If a statement is being issued, South Africa condemns Israel's attack on Iran. Is that South Africa that condemns that? Or is it a group within the government of national unity? It's not the government of national unity. That is problematic. And those kind of positions being taken creates a real difficult position for South Africa internationally.
You're not suggesting for a minute that the former Miss South Africa and the Banyana coach doesn't know more about running South Africa than the politicians do?
I have great respect for both of them, but I would say horses for courses. You see, the equivalent would be if they ask me to go to the big sporting event awards in Zurich, and I go and give a speech on how coaches should behave. I don't think that'll be a good idea.
Okay, so now, we sort of make light of it, but this President Ramaphosa, I love it that before announcing the details of the national dialogue, they announced the price, which is obviously eye-watering. But the point is this: in your opinion, then, who should be in that national dialogue, and what is Parliament not the national dialogue?
That's a good argument, because after the election, that is the representatives that the people elected to represent them. So Parliament is not being seen in that fashion. From my perspective, the idea of the dialogue was for the parties in the government of national unity who could not agree on a policy platform because the Constitution forced us to form a government within 14 days, to sit down, work out a policy framework for the next 5 years. Now, that's not what has happened. Now we've got something completely different a year later. And as it played out, originally, civic society took the initiative with all kinds of institutions. That was then taken away and it was brought to the office of the presidency. I understand that. But you've already seen the response. So many people have said, no, we're not going to participate. The Democratic Alliance says not going to participate. I would like to see the budget. How on earth do you think it can be sold to anyone to say we're going to spend 700 million? What's that? Can't be. And even within the context, I think I'm in favor of dialogue. You have to talk. You have to continuously talk to other people. That's what we need to do. But then you need to create the right forum, and you need to have on that forum and on that agenda the right issues to take South Africa forward.
But now, Corne, what good is talking if ultimately the decision is going to get taken by the biggest party in that particular setup?
No, it can't be taken by the biggest party in that setup. That's not a coalition. That's not a government of national unity. That's minority tyranny, where one party thinks then still that they are the majority and they are governing. No, they can't. They've got a 40% in the government of national unity. And I hear that people are now referring to maybe a motion of no confidence in the president. It will have immense implications, constitutionally speaking, and one will have to look at all the implications of that. I don't think I'm in favor of that. We'll have to look at all the implications. But on the other hand, the president must always realize he was elected. His party could only bring 159 votes out of 400 that made him the president. And it's the same principle that we had in the past, the problem with coalitions. The largest party should be the most humble and the most understanding of the aspirations of the other parties that they are co-governing with. In other words, they must understand these parties also represent constituencies. They also need to be accommodated. And if you really want to serve the bigger deal, then we must accommodate one another. And that's not the case at the moment.
Yeah, now, everything that you've said sort of points towards the fact that this government of national unity is not in any way, shape or form performing to the expectations of,
yes.
In other words, what was written on the box is not on the inside of this government of national unity.
Yeah.
You've put your party as one of the signatories to this thing. You've, one would say, have got the benefits of a minister and of this and of that. But it sounds to me like it cannot hold.
Well, the problem is, at the moment, what we do have is, I agree, the expectations were not met at all. I honestly, and everybody thought, here's an opportunity. Here's really an opportunity where the electorate forced us to cooperate with one another, to co-govern, and now we can take South Africa in the right direction. We cannot do that if we stick to failed economic policies. We cannot do that if we have radical international relations being forced upon South Africa. So there are huge problems with regard to expectations. At the moment, what we do see is some ministers in different political parties that are doing very well, that are doing exceptionally well and making a difference. But that is those ministries and those individuals that are making the difference. It's not necessarily the government in totality. It can be and it should be different. And what is needed is that we should build trust with the electorate to demonstrate. We are now 1 year in this term. If we do the right thing, there's 4 years to come in which we can make a success and turn South Africa around. But then you need the political will, you need to build the trust between the parties, and that is not the case at the moment.
Well, if anything, it's not just not the case, but there's more strident opposition within the government of national unity to any dissenting view, voice, or opinion.
That's very true, and that is a problem. As I've said, I was a strong proponent to participate. Why? My argument is you have to be around the table where decisions are taken. If you can have an influence, if you can be heard, you have to make use of that opportunity. Secondly, I represent a very big Afrikaner constituency, which is part of my constituency. It's not exclusively our constituency. I also need to try and get things done for my support base and my constituency and for minorities and in the bigger whole of South Africa. If you cannot achieve that, then you have to be in a position where you need to ask the question, why am I then there? You cannot be in a thing where you are just being used to bring your vote and to create the impression of this united government of unity. You cannot do that. And it's not in our interest. If that government collapses, it will have a detrimental effect on the value of the rand. It will create all kinds of economic problems, etc., etc. But we need a serious reset also within the government of national unity.
Now, the government of national unity has been recently dealt yet another blow by the president firing Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield from the Democratic Alliance, Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry. What did you make of that?
That was when we were in the United States, but I followed what happened here. There are a couple of things that are very strange. If what he did is such a big problem, why do you wait 4 months or even longer before you act? That is a little bit fishy as far as I'm concerned. And even if that is what the rule says, and we all know there are some other members allegedly who have done exactly the same and there were different steps taken against them. Even if that's the case, then because you're in a government of national unity and you have to cooperate, you have to be more understanding, you have to be more lenient. I can't believe for 1 second that kind of thing cannot be resolved and sorted out because there are all kinds of sensitivities. Do you really want to push a party like the DA out of the government of national unity and embarrass them in this way that they have done this? Why do you want to do that? So my take on this was I think it's completely unnecessary. I think it's the wrong message to be sent. Or do you want to punish some of the parties? The Freedom Front Plus, for example. I've done this trip now to the United States. I'm not a member of the executive. So I don't need to ask permission. I needed to ask permission from my own party, which I did. And my party structures gave me the opportunity to go, and I'm very thankful for that. But I didn't need any permission from the president. But hopefully the president will not punish my party or Dr. Groenewald in the government of national unity because we did what we did. If that was done, it will send a very strong message to the world and the United States. You remember, it's just a kind of approach which is the wrong approach. I don't think it's good.
Now, please explain to me, the government of national unity was formed just over a year ago. How often is there a meeting of the parties within the government of national unity?
We are dealing with two separate things. The one is the executive, in other words, cabinet. Cabinet is supposed to meet regularly. They meet, I think, weekly, and there's normal cabinet meetings where the members of cabinet are present. And but they basically deals with actions of the executive and departments and how these things are run. But separate from that, there's a need for a political coming together of the leaders of the political parties. Because within the government, you've got 10 political parties with their own structures, their own support bases, their own constituencies, their own leadership. There is such a meeting taking place from time to time. As a matter of fact, we did have a meeting shortly before the final budget debate, or the final budget being brought to the parliament the third time, where President Ramaphosa did call such a meeting, and it was a 3-hour meeting, which was quite constructive. The first hour and a half, we spoke about the functioning of the government of national unity. The second hour and a half was about the budget. But in that meeting, the idea and the feeling was to say, if we want to make a success of this, we need to build trust also amongst the parties, amongst the leaders within the parties. We need to create a getaway opportunity. Call it a bosberaad, call it a weekend away, because in the end, it may be political parties, but in the end, it's about individuals that need to take responsibility for their own parties. And if we know each other, in Afrikaans, there's a beautiful saying, onbekend is onbemind. If you don't know someone, you won't like that person. Let's get together and let's try to find and see if we can find common ground. But that has not happened yet. And in the meantime, unfortunately, it seems that some of the parties are already positioning themselves with a view of the local government elections that come next year. And that's unfortunate because we must rather look from the national point of view. We've got a government that can have an opportunity to govern for the next 4 years and make a real difference in terms of economic growth, job creation, alleviating of poverty, etc.
Yeah, and just as an aside, I believe the presidency can arrange a bosberaad. It's only going to cost 175 million rand. So
it doesn't have to cost that. It can cost nothing. We can go at our own expense. Yeah. I will take my car, my sleeping bag, and some clothes for the weekend, and we will have a nice braai and drink something. Yeah, it doesn't have to cost anything.
I don't think the ANC leadership would agree with that. But let's just go back to your meeting. Let's use that meeting as an example. What, you know, if there's one superpower that President Ramaphosa possesses, is that you can have a 3-hour meeting and reach some brilliant conclusions, but then, you know, that paper ends up in file 13, as
Yes,
they used to call
yes.
it.
Unfortunately, the words are good, but action means something.
Yes.
And I've been around too long to be misguided by just words. We all saw, for example, when President Ramaphosa was in the Oval Office and the video was shown after Dim the Lights, President Trump confronted President Ramaphosa and said, but do you support this? It was about kill the Boer, kill the farmer. And President Ramaphosa said, no, that's just not our position and we don't support this, etc., etc. But the next week back in South Africa, when he was confronted with that, he supported it. He said, no, this is an old struggle song and we this, that, and the other. So one should not be naive in terms of just words. It should be backed up with action. And I am afraid we haven't seen that kind of action. The action that I've seen so far is the same kind of things that were done in the past that takes us down the slippery road of oblivion, and the country is not doing well at all.
Okay, so as James Myberg put it so well, he has voice number 1 and voice number 2, right? The one is for international consumption and the one is for the local market. And sometimes, literally, as you point out there, the president will say 2 conflicting things, almost back to back, depending on who he's speaking to. Which brings us to the burning question. If the government of national unity is so dysfunctional, why stay in it?
That's a good question. I've been asked whether the Freedom Front Plus will stay or go. And I've said, well, first of all, I believe in collective leadership. I will consult the party and the structures and our constituency before taking any final steps. But once you leave, you've left, and you must think very carefully because of what you do, what you don't do. Another party, the Democratic Alliance, has said in the beginning when they came into the government of national unity, they have to go in there to prevent the doomsday reality with the MK and the EFF. I have a different view in that regard. I think we should forget about MK and the EFF. And when I say forget about them, I'm talking about the leadership in those parties and the leadership being given. We should come with a message to individual South Africans, black, white, color, doesn't matter, and bring to them a solution of an alternative in South Africa, something that can resonate with what's in the hearts and the minds of people in terms of this can turn this country around. Forget about parties. Go to the heart and minds of the people directly. So, talking about the government of national unity, I honestly believe it can be the perfect thing that can turn this country around. But we haven't seen that. And at the moment, let's hope we can engage shortly and see if they can come also reset, because if we don't, the question will be, what are you doing there? Why are you there?
Because, I mean, at some point, your voters, your constituency must look at you and punish you for the poor performance of the government of national unity. So you are there to do a job, you haven't done it.
Sure. No, I understand that. I understand that very well. I communicate with the constituency throughout and tell them, this is what I think, this is what we want to do. I'm going to try. If I can't, then I'll come back to them and say, well, what do we do now? Let's do it different thing.
Do you not think that your party, among not being the only one, gets a lot of cover as everybody takes it out on the Democratic Alliance?
Yes. Let me give you an example. And I'm honest when I say this. The mere fact that my colleague John Steenhuisen went in that delegation to the Oval Office, no matter what he said, was detrimental to him and his party. He was guilty by association. I didn't go there. The mood amongst the electorate is so bad at the moment and so antagonistic because of the failures of the ANC and those failures being forced on the people. So the DA is taking a lot of flack because of association. That's the first point. And then obviously also with regard to other things that has happened, people expected them to do other things which they didn't do. That's their decision in terms of the position of Mr. Whitfield, the position with regard to VAT, all those kind of things. So they are taking a lot of flack, and I understand that. People do what they do, they think what they think. My approach is, I want to walk a straight line. This is the fact. These are the facts. I put it on the table. If you want to support me, thank you very much. And whatever will happen in any case.
How would Corné Mulder, as leader of a political party, have handled a situation like the firing of a deputy minister that was in your party? Let's just say your minister got fired. How would you respond to that?
I believe that people don't act necessarily in a bad way. I believe that you have to look beyond the things that you see first of all. We are all humans. We all make mistakes. I would have been lenient. I would have had a discussion with that colleague. I would have said, well, this is not how we're going to do that. And I would have weighed the pros and cons in this process. What would be the best in the interest of the government of national unity? To make an example of a deputy minister, or to bring people closer together and motivate them and bring the best out of them? That's my style. And I would have done it completely differently.
Lastly, do you keep the option open of Cape independence?
Yes.
Do you think this is a useful thing or a divisive thing?
Interesting, even now in the United States, that was brought by some individuals as what is happening there, and they wanted to know. The irony is, if South Africa succeeds, and that's what I want to see, that South Africa succeeds, we need to create a future for everyone in South Africa, regardless of where they reside. If we succeed in doing that, the whole notion of Cape independence will become weaker and weaker. But the irony is, if South Africa continues to fail, people are looking at alternatives. My approach was in the party to say when I became leader, we've got supporters throughout South Africa, but the expectations and the needs and the things that you need to address in Limpopo, for example, are different from those in KZN and are different from those in the Northern Cape. The reality is in the Western Cape, there is also this feeling in terms of the Western Cape is different to a certain extent, rightly or wrongly so, for various reasons. I think one should keep all options on the table. My real view is, it is not either this or that. It's and. We need to create solutions that can accommodate the realities in South Africa across the board. And this, with regard to Cape independence, there's a long, long way to go. And in the end, the people will have to express themselves whether they think this is an option or not an option. And then you also have to look at the constitutional reality in this regard. I want to see that South Africa becomes a success throughout and accommodate our people wherever they are. That's part of the reality.
Well, Dr. Corné Mulder, thank you so much for coming through. To everybody that watched us, go and support Pace Car Rental. They keep us on air. You can get a discount when you rent a car there. Thank you so much for watching The State of the Nation. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Corné Mulder, thank you so much. We'll see you again on The State of the Nation. Thank you
very much. It was a privilege.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, I'm actually speaking. I was meant to speak to Helen this morning, and then she postponed to just now. I mean, they are carrying the can, aren't they?